This is a historic day for the Elmira Police Department. Justice after almost 62 years. On Sunday, March 15th, 1964, at approximately 10:50 p.m., 12-year-old Mary Theresa Simpson was reported.
In November 2025, a team of investigators stood in a cemetery in Elmira, New York, and gave an order most people will never hear in their lifetime: exhume the body. The man in the grave had been dead for over 20 years. He'd never been arrested for what he did. He'd never been questioned. He'd never even been considered a suspect. But a speck of DNA, smaller than anything visible to the naked eye, had just spent 6 decades waiting for someone to find it. This is the case of Mary Theresa Simpson. It took 61 years to solve. It is, as of this recording, the oldest cold case ever closed using DNA technology. Sunday, March 15th, 1964, Elmira, New York, a small city in the southern tier, the kind of place where everyone more or less knew everyone. Mary Theresa Simpson was 12 years old. Her parents had separated the previous year, and by that March, custody had shifted more than once. She'd been living with her father, who had recently moved them back to Elmira for a new job. That afternoon, around 3 o'clock, Mary told her father she was going to visit her cousin. She didn't. Instead, she went to see her mother, whom she only got to see about once a month under the new arrangement. She was last seen a little after 6:30 that evening, walking home near East Market and Harriet Streets after that visit. She never made it. Her father reported her missing that night. 4 days later, on March 19th, a man out hiking with his 2 sons in a wooded area off Combs Hill Road, roughly 7 miles from her home, found her body. She had been partially concealed beneath branches, dirt, and 4 heavy stones. An autopsy determined the cause of death was asphyxiation following a violent assault. We will not dwell on those details. They are not what this story is about. What matters is what came next. A 12-year-old girl was dead, and for the next 61 years, nobody knew who had done it. In 1964, investigators had almost nothing to work with beyond the physical scene itself. No security cameras, no cell phones, no national databases. What they had was old-fashioned legwork, and they used it aggressively. By October of that year, police had questioned 300 people. 300 in a city that at the time had a population of roughly 45,000. That's a staggering share of the community pulled into a single investigation. Local radio station Whelm and the Star-Gazette newspaper raised $1,000 for a reward fund for anyone with information. By 1972, that reward had grown to $5,000, a serious sum at the time. None of it produced an arrest. Here's what almost nobody at the time understood. The answer wasn't going to come from a witness, a confession, or a tip line. It was going to come from something too small to see, sitting quietly on a piece of evidence that police had the foresight to keep. That single decision, to preserve the evidence rather than let the case go cold and get boxed away for good, turned out to be the most important thing anyone did in 1964. It just wouldn't pay off for another 61 years. Among the items recovered and preserved from the scene were Mary's eyeglasses and a fan club card. Small, ordinary objects, the kind of things a 12-year-old in 1964 would carry without a second thought. They sat in storage for decades, waiting for a form of science that didn't exist yet. That science started to catch up in the year 2000. Investigators with the New York State Police Forensic Investigation Center tested fluid found on Mary's clothing and confirmed it was semen, evidence that had been sitting there undisturbed since the day of the murder. In 2003, 39 years after Mary's death, a DNA profile was extracted from that sample and entered into CODIS, the National Combined DNA Index System that cross-references crime scene DNA against convicted offenders, there was no match. This is worth sitting with for a second, because it's the moment most true crime stories skip past. The evidence existed, the science existed, and still nothing. The killer's DNA simply wasn't in the system because he'd never been arrested for a crime serious enough to require a sample. CODIS can only find someone who's already in it. If a person has managed to avoid ever being convicted of something that puts them in the database, they're functionally invisible to it, no matter how advanced the testing gets. For the Simpson family, this meant another weight. Mary's older sister, Linda, was 16 when her sister was murdered. She's since said in interviews that she thinks about her sister every day. For nearly 20 more years after that CODIS search came up empty, that daily grief had no name attached to it. The case needed a different kind of science, and in the early 2020s, it finally arrived. Around this time, a new investigative method, forensic genetic genealogy, had already reshaped how cold cases were solved nationwide. Instead of only checking DNA against criminal databases, investigators could now compare crime scene DNA against consumer genealogy databases, the same ones ordinary people use to build family trees or learn their ancestry. If a distant relative of a suspect had ever taken one of those tests, investigators could work backward through the family tree to identify the suspect themselves, even if the suspect had never given their own DNA to anyone. It's slow, it's methodical. It looks less like a fingerprint match and more like painstaking genealogical research, because that's exactly what it is. In 2022, the Elmira Police Department received grant funding from a nonprofit called Season of Justice, an organization that exists specifically to fund advanced forensic work on cold cases that police departments often can't afford on their own. In 2023, they partnered with two more organizations. Othram, a private forensic lab in Texas that specializes in building usable DNA profiles out of degraded or minute samples, and the Criminal Investigation Resource Center at Russell Sage College, where students helped organize the case file, digitize decades of paperwork, and review the evidence with fresh eyes. 60 years of storage boxes were about to meet 21st century science. Othram scientists took the old, degraded genetic material and applied a technique called forensic-grade genome sequencing to build a far more complete DNA profile than had ever existed for this case. That profile went to the FBI's genetic genealogy team, who began building out family trees from distant DNA matches, the long, quiet work of turning a stranger's genetic fragments into a name. It would take time, but for the first time in 60 years, the case was actually moving. Here's where the story takes a turn nobody could have scripted. At a certain point in the investigation, the case came down to one final, fragile DNA sample, the last usable piece of genetic material tied to the crime. If this sample failed, there might not be another chance. The evidence was that limited and that irreplaceable. FBI Special Agent Kenneth Jensen, who was assisting the Elmira Police Department, packed the sample in dry ice and shipped it toward the lab in Texas. Then the weather intervened. A historic ice storm shut down the FedEx hub in Memphis, Tennessee, the largest FedEx hub in the world, and the one this shipment happened to be routed through. The package sat stranded in the middle of the chaos, and dry ice by its nature doesn't last forever. It sublimates, it disappears. Every hour the shipment sat frozen in place was an hour closer to the sample thawing, and with it, 60 years of preserved evidence potentially gone for good. Jensen couldn't get through to anyone at FedEx directly. So he did what investigators have always done when the official channel breaks down. He called someone he knew. The FBI happened to have a liaison embedded at that exact FedEx hub. That agent went looking for one small frozen package in the middle of a shut-down, storm-crippled distribution center, described by the people involved as, essentially, a scavenger hunt. He found it in time. The sample went into an FBI freezer until the storm cleared, and once it did, it was shipped on to the lab in Texas. The science could finally begin. The results led investigators to a name that had never once come up in 61 years of investigation: Alfred Murray Jr. Murray had died back in 2004 of natural causes at 72 years old. He'd been a truck driver's son, raised in Elmira, buried in the same city where the murder took place. He had no known connection to Mary Theresa Simpson or her family. He had never been interviewed. He had never been on a suspect list. If not for genetic genealogy, his name might never have surfaced at all. But genealogy alone wasn't proof. To confirm it, investigators needed direct comparison. They obtained a DNA sample from Murray's son, a family match that pointed strongly in the right direction, but wasn't yet definitive on its own. So, in November 2025, investigators made the decision to exhume Alfred Murray Jr.'s body. A forensic anthropologist assisted with the process, funded in part by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, the same organization Agent Jensen went on to work for after retiring from the FBI. The comparison between Murray's own remains and the 61-year-old DNA sample from Mary's clothing came back conclusive. The odds that the DNA belonged to anyone other than Alfred Murray Jr. were less than 1 in 320 billion. There was no more room for doubt. On February 10, 2026, at a press conference held at the Chemung County District Attorney's Office, Elmira Police Chief Kristen Thorne announced what dozens of officers, many of them long since retired, had spent entire careers hoping to hear. The case was closed. Justice after 61 years, Thorne told the room. Sergeant Bill Goodwin, the lead investigator on the case in its final years, had spent much of that stretch chasing down a piece of evidence that at more than one point nearly didn't survive the journey to the lab. For him and for the department, this wasn't an abstract cold case. It was a name they'd carried for a very long time, finally attached to an answer. Because Alfred Murray Jr. had died over 2 decades earlier, there would be no arrest, no trial, no sentencing. Some cases end in a courtroom. This one ended in a cemetery and a press conference. That's an unusual kind of resolution. No verdict to deliver, no defendant to face the family. Just a name, finally confirmed after 6 decades of not having one. For Mary's family, the announcement was described as bittersweet. Linda Galpin, Mary's older sister, now 78, has spent every one of those 61 years without an answer for what happened to her little sister. Getting one, even one that comes with no trial to attend, still means something. It means the case is no longer an open question. It means Mary's name and her killer's name are now written in the same sentence. For the historical record, Mary Theresa Simpson's case took 61 years. It is currently the oldest case ever solved using DNA technology, a record that, given how fast this science is moving, likely won't hold for long. What doesn't change is what her sister said, that she thinks about Mary every single day. Cases close. Grief doesn't. Not entirely. But for one family in Elmira, New York, after 61 years, a question that had no answer finally has one. The file is closed. The name is Alfred Murray Jr.